Well, somebody actually said that. Who was it? Because somebody said to him, well, what about your plane? Max, his son name. Max was there. Max was his son. And Max said, well, what about the plane? He's got a plane. He hasn't told you he has a plane? That boy's got more toys. Okay. So again, what's going to really help, right, is next week, come in with assumption, law, and conclusion questions, right? And that'll dominate the first couple hours of that class if you're active. It's not the end of the world if you're not, but it'll be fun. Okay, conclusions. So you're not going to be a lawyer if you don't draw reasonable conclusions, right? You know, and again, there's just nothing to this. I mean, so again, in terms of understanding how to reason or how we proceed, the conclusion is it's separated from the reasoning. That's why it's called the conclusion. It's not part of the reasoning, it's the result of the reasoning. So when the reasoning is compelling, I'm saying you shouldn't need my conclusion, right? You should be able to just hear my reasoning, and then I should be able to. So I really don't, I don't want your conclusion. I have no interest, but give me your reasoning. I desperately want your reasoning. And yet that's not how the world I see outside of law does not go that way. Everybody has conclusions. Okay. I don't care about that. I want to be persuaded. You know, I want to be persuaded the way I was sent down. Be persuaded, which is this. Not have you persuaded one way or the other. Okay. So we get to the conclusion by one of two pathways. There's no exceptions. You're either getting there by inference or deduction. And all that means, inference could be true. A deduction is not true. So when you say that word inference, would it be, I have a sense you guys got what an inference is, yes? You with me? It's that, that one spark removed away from an established fact, right? But that one spark you could always be wrong on, right? So it's more attenuated than an established fact. So, an incomplete argument would just have inferences. They wouldn't end up, in other words, it would be incomplete. If my goal were to persuade you that Vicky were on the phone, if that were my goal, right? But I never got there. And I'd say, well, we heard the phone ring, all right? And I saw the phone number. So we have two pieces of established fact. And then I start saying what I expect, right? And I say, so what I expect is I'll hear a voice. Well, if I were to stop there, you get the argument, had no conclusion unless I intended the conclusion to be, I heard a voice talk to me. It really is about precision. It's about like, why do they talk and why do they do this? Well, because we're paid to do this, right? So in inference, in an incomplete argument, you could say, well, that was the last, he stopped, so I don't know if that was the conclusion or not, right? Because it sounded like it was more coming, but no more came, right? But a conclusion based on inferences, so it's just that thing about, okay, here's what I expect, right? And when that expectation is realized, then here's the next thing I expect, right? Where does the right to privacy come from? Is that in the Constitution? Is there a right to privacy in the Constitution?
No.
So there's no right to privacy. How the hell do we have a right to privacy? what did the court have to do to get a right of privacy?
It's inferred.
And when they inferred, what could they have made? A mistake. I'm not saying they did, but I need you to get the difference between, is it fair to say, nowhere in the Constitution is there anything written about the right of two men to get married? How do we have that right? How did that happen? What did the court have to do? Infer, right? But if here we have a right to practice religion, would it be fair to say we have an explicit right, right?
Yes.
Well, what if my religion is that I find that homosexuality is evil? Do you see how that now bumps against what is an inferred right? Talk to me. All I'm getting is trying to think this way. My position's not important. Do you get? Talk to me. That as you infer privacy, you may at some degree constrain other rights that are part of the Constitution. You guys see it? Talk to me. So you want to be aware when I'm inferring, what if any impact does that have on what's established? You guys see it? So do you get it's not who you root for? Can I get you over that? This is not who you root for, right? It's about how you reason. Yes? You can do it. I know you can do it. I know you can do it. Okay. So if you follow by inference, all you're doing is saying, I have an expectation, right? The expectation is realized. I have an expectation that comes after that expectation. It's realized. Every time it has to be realized. So the greater the number of inferences you put in there, you're now building inference on top of inference. You get it? It's like sand. Because every inference, you're at risk of failure. You're at risk of error. You guys get it? Okay. Nevertheless, this is how we proceed, which is why when I say inference, it's always something that could be true. A really, really, really convincing argument based on inference, which I would like to think I have done in court, can never be an argument that's designated as one that must be true, right? Because it's based on inference. I am requiring everybody to infer the defendant's guilt. Because in the absence of the defendant saying I'm guilty, and even that may not be not because the defendant may be psychologically or mentally disabled, but short of that, you get nobody saying to me in the world of inference I have to prove anything beyond all that. Nothing has to be true, right? Just degrees of probability. What's more probable or not, right? 94% probable, 78% probable. It's a business. So here, the conclusion issue, there are two ways they test you on this. First way is the issue is going to be to identify the argument's main conclusion. Now, they don't have to have the word main in there. When they want you to identify the argument's main conclusion, they can also say, well, let me stop it. How many main conclusions can an argument have? One. And therefore, if answer choice A restates the argument's main conclusion, what's the answer?
That one.
Kabish? Every time. Now, if I change the wording, and instead the issue says, identify the argument's conclusion, but the word main is missing, right? But it says identify the argument's conclusion. Now, based on that wording, how many conclusions can the argument have?
More than one.
Well, if I say identify the argument's conclusion, and it had more than one, it can only have one. Kabish? Yeah, everybody agree? Talk to me. So these slight changes sometimes have meaning on the test, right? And sometimes they don't. How about when you're confronted with the issue, identify the argument's overall conclusion. How many overall conclusions can it be? One. So it doesn't make any difference. You with me?
Superfluous word.
Yep. Yeah, but am I missing something, or aren't they rewarding the person who prepares? And more specifically, prepares to this text. right? Not prepared on anything you've done in college. This is the LSAT. So they should want to reward you if you prepared to take the LSAT, which means you have to be familiar with what they want from you, right, and not take it for granted. So that's pretty much it on main conclusions. The way they're going to phrase it, right, is identify the main conclusion, identify the overall conclusion, or identify the argument's conclusion. Okay. So what's a conclusion? Conclusion is the thing being explained. So stop as you're in this preparation. Again, you're only going to get this once, unless you retake the course, right? So now is what you want to do it, right? You want to say, okay, now I have the time, now I'm in this preparation zone, right? And you can stay in this preparation zone for 3 months, for 6 months, for 9 months, or as long as you want. Just affects your entry date to law school, that's all. Okay. So let's again think like in regular life. Conclusions have to be explained, right? So just if I say I disagree, what should you say to me as a lawyer?
Why?
Bingo. Why? So why aren't what you're really asking me is to explain why I disagree. And when you're asking me what my explanation is, aren't you asking me for my reasoning? So there's really just not a heavy lift. Every time in your life you've said why, whether you know it or not, what you did is you just demanded or requested the reasoning of the other person. That's all. So think about this in taking a test. When on the test, if you're reading an argument and somebody says, I disagree, what's the conclusion? They disagree. How about they say, I agree? What's the conclusion? I mean, you can add other language to that. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about baseball, right, you can be agreeing about baseball, right? Or obviously, if you're writing about baseball, you can disagree about baseball. But what phrase has to be there? Yeah, well, it might be baseball, but more to that would be I agree or I disagree. Would have to be part of the conclusion. Have you ever recommended something to somebody? Have you ever made a recommendation to somebody? And what might be a common one-word response to your recommendation? Why? Why? You're saying, I recommend whatever you're going to recommend, right? Would it surprise you if somebody asked why? And hasn't that person asked for the reasoning? So when you're taking the test and somebody recommends somebody, what's the conclusion? They made a recommendation. And again, whatever the content is, that's what they're recommending. That may be part of the answer, right? But you get, the answer cannot be bereft of the fact that this is a recommendation. So no other answer choice that fails to say, use the term recommendation, is not the answer choice. So think about it again, just big picture, what does it mean to draw a conclusion? Okay, so I'm going to explain the conclusion because it's not an opinion, it's a conclusion. A conclusion requires evidence. An opinion requires what? You can have whatever opinion you want. But a conclusion requires evidence. When I say I'm drawing a conclusion, I'm putting myself out there. All right, saying, well, now I'm obligated to give you reasoning. It's not a conclusion that I'm a Yankee fan. I mean, you know, let's say it's okay, you're a Yankee, what the fuck? I mean, you know, it's an opinion, it's a view, that's nice. Feeling, right? Nobody's asking me to prove. No. So, if we were just to take a couple of examples, so you get, this is one of the 5 ways they test you on your ability to draw a conclusion. Typically, there are exceptions, but typically, this question will be this issue of main conclusion, overall conclusion. 2/3 of the time, it's going to be it's going to be assigned to numbers 1 through 12. What do you think that suggests about when it's assigned the assigned questions 1 through 12, about their level of difficulty?
1 to 2.
Yeah, 1 or 2. To a very high degree of certainty. Not a foregone conclusion, right? But you're now lawyers, right? So everything is on the scale of likelihood, right? So nothing's 100%, but there are things that are really, really, really likely. There are things that are just blankly. All right. So if I just take I'm just going to open up exam 72 here and see. And here we go. If we look at question, this is, I'm sorry, I don't have the individual volume. So this is exam 72, which is the first exam, I think. This is section 2 and question number 4. Okay, we'll try 2 of these, see 2 of these. So here's what you're doing. Does everybody get, we're looking here at electric stovetop burners. Okay.
What section is it?
Section 2. It should be the first exam in there, 72. Section 2. And question number 4. So I'm saying, you're sitting there, right? You're already taking in data. The data is question number 4, which creates a presumption. Rebuttable, right, but a presumption. The next thing is I'm looking now at the issue. I don't care what the law says. What's the issue? The issue is, which one of the following most accurately expresses the conclusion drawn in the argument? Bingo, got it, right? So now it influences how I'm just reading for whatever it is that's being explained. That's it, nothing more, nothing less. What's the thing being explained? Okay. And I have here electric stovetop burners would cause fewer fires if their highest temperature were limited to 662 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm reading Fahrenheit because I don't know Celsius, so I'm reading it. Okay. All right. Which provides more than enough heat for efficient and effective cooking. Okay, so I'm given a fact. Stop that for a second. You have a slash mark at home, right? And you say, well, would it be fair to say that something's been described? Talk to me, because you're trying to get the difference between what's a fact in an argument and what's a conclusion in an argument. So I'm saying as a general principle, when you're describing something, it's factual. So this is, if I read this again, I'm reading about these burners, and I'm being told, I'm being informed, right, that they would cause fewer fires if their highest temperature were limited to 662 degrees Fahrenheit, which provides more than enough heat for efficient and effective cooking. Okay, that's what you told me as a fact. We really have no need to go over 662 degrees. Next sentence. The lowest temperature at which cooking oil and most common fibers ignite is 387 degrees Celsius. Now I'm making read Celsius. All right. But the lowest temperature at which cooking oil and common fibers ignite is 387 degrees Celsius, and electric burners on high go well above 700 degrees Celsius. So, what do you think the conclusion of that is? If you were not looking at an answer choice.
The first part of the sentence before the comma. Electric stovetop burners will cause fewer fires if the highest temperature were limited to 350 degrees Celsius.
Doesn't it appear to be the case that everything after that explains why it would cause fewer fires? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Doesn't it say that everything else is kind of factual, right? You're saying, you're telling me, well, it would cause. Okay, it's a fact that it would, right? But aren't you then explaining to me how? Okay. And what does answer choice A say? Electric stovetop burners would cause fewer fires if the highest temperature were limited to 350 Celsius. What do you think A is?
That's correct.
The answer. Yeah, and that, you don't want to actually bring this into the test, but you get the flavor, right? Okay. Let's look at, go to section 3. Save that. Yes, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask a question because when Jim was here last week, he said he gave us some like keywords to be able to detect like where the conclusion is. So would which be included in one of those, since it has a sentence that says which provides and then goes through the whole example? Because he gave us like say since can sometimes go before the premise or after to then talk about the conclusion. Since can also be replaced by like because or for.
Yes, the
So
words,
would which be part of that group as well that we should look out for?
with the word with, W-I-T-H.
No, which, because it says the conclusion and then it says which provides and then it goes into the whole, like, description.
I'm sorry, direct me to where, are you saying the word which as it appears in the question?
Yeah, so.
No.
No, in the
No,
paragraph.
Yeah, in the beginning of the paragraph
After
it
the
says-
temperature,
Yeah.
which provides.
After 662.
I wouldn't
No.
say so. No, I would say the most probative words in the role they play in an argument, the word since on the LSAT means because. They're interchangeable, there's absolutely no difference. And each of those two words introduces the reasoning. So every time you see the word since, you're explaining something. I'm going to get sick since. Well, that's going to explain why I get sick.
Yeah.
I'm going to get sick because. I wouldn't say the word which standing alone would give me insight.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
certainly the word since and the word because give me very much insight.
Okay.
If we look at section 3, and we look at question number 3, section 3, question number 3. Again, you start with the issue, right? And the issue is, which one of the following most accurately expresses the conclusion drawn in the restaurant owner's argument? So you stop. But the only reason I'm reading this is because the person gave me a conclusion, and I'm simply going to say to my client, here was this person's conclusion, which requires me to infer. Right? That's but here it goes. So what is the thing being explained? It says here, the owner says, you know, the newspaper reporter who panned my restaurant acknowledges having no special expertise about food and its preparation. I have a slash mark there, you stop. So that's a fact. That's what you're telling me is a fact. That the person acknowledges I don't have this expertise. Okay? The next sentence. His previous job was as a political reporter. That's not a fact. I have two facts. Okay, he's a political reporter. Next sentence. He's a good writer, but he is not a true restaurant critic. Oh boy, that doesn't seem like a fact to me. Doesn't that seem like a characterization?
Right.
So I want you to stop and think about the difference between a fact and a characterization, because it's really, in the world of the world I'm in, that's incredibly important. A characterization is not a fact. Again, because you'll hear us say, you know, if you say you're happy, what does that mean? I mean, I don't know. I have a sense of where you're going, but I don't know, what does that mean? You know, I'm pissed. Well, okay, but that's a characterization, right? It's not, you know. So he's a schmuck. Okay, but that's a characterization. So do you get that line 3? He is a good writer, but he's not a true restaurant critic. Doesn't sound like that needs to be explained. So the final sentence is, a newspaper would never call someone a drama critic who had no special training in theater. So if I'm asked to give the conclusion of this, would it be fair to say the conclusion appears to be in that third sentence?
Right.
Meaning that the reporter is not a true restaurant critic. Do you see it? Talk to me. Again, if you break it down, and that's what I want you to do at home, right? I want you to break it down and say, now that I've read the whole thing, because facts can turn into conclusions. You got to see the whole argument unfold, right? Every time you read the first sentence, suppose it's fact. But if the rest of the argument then goes on to explain the first sentence, well, then it was the conclusion. So you say, well, what is it that's being explained? Well, you gave me as a fact here that the reporter has panned my restaurant. He's acknowledged no special expertise about food or its preparation. So that's given to me as a fact. That's what the person has acknowledged. Second fact, his previous job as a political reporter. There's no dispute, right? That's a fact. From those two facts, I now go to, he's a good writer. have you really shown me he's a good writer? But he is not a true restaurant critic. Have you really shown me he's not a true? Don't you need to explain what what you've done in the prior two sentences as best you can, I suppose, right? And then he goes on, the newspaper would never call someone a drama critic who had no special training in theater. Does everybody get that the third sentence is distinguishable from the first, the second, and the fourth? Talk to me. Okay.
Fact, conclusion type of thing?
I'm sorry?
Fact, conclusion?
In this one, yes, it's fact, conclusion. So you guys can just tell me what the answer is, right? So read the 5 choices. Okay. Anybody like A? No A's. Anybody like B? No B's. Anybody like C? No C's. How about D? Lots of D's. E? And I think we did see one late B there. Did we see one late B there? And B says the previous job of the newspaper reporter who panned the restaurant was a political reporter. Isn't that a fact? That's the second sentence, right? And the second sentence is descriptive. Just telling me what his his prior job was a political reporter, and connecting it to, oh, and by the way, that's the same person who panned a restaurant. But the purpose of that information to tell me that he has no special expertise in preparation and that he was a political reporter is to sum up basically by saying, well, he may have been a good writer, but he's not a true restaurant critic, which is a characterization. But those things don't make you a true restaurant critic. That is a point of view. Point of views are conclusions. So, but in any event, what you want to do now in terms of this week, right, is you go through exams 72 through 77, right? Every time you're looking at a main conclusion, it'll be phrased that way, main conclusion, or overall conclusion. Write it down, and then come in and list this through. The other way they're going to test you inferentially is by using the language, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above. That's the way the issue would be introduced. Which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above?
That's a conclusion question?
Yes, and you notice the word conclusion is nowhere to be found. That's because they're either. Right. Now, that can be referred to as an inference question. Right. Which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? So that doesn't necessarily mean the argument is complete. Because you're going to say, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? I don't know. You know, if we hear the phone ring, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? And if choice A said, say we gave the Vicky thing, right? So we see Vicky's name, Vicky's number. We hear the phone ring, and you have my testimony that I recognize the name and the number, right? So all that's established. And then we say, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? So if choice A said Vicky, well, that would be strongly supported, yes? It would be strongly supported, yeah. But there's no way to know whether it's most strongly supported until you've read the other answer choices. What if answer choice E says, so choice A says Vicky's on the phone, right? But answer choice E says there's a voice on the phone. What's most strongly supported? E. Do you guys see? Talk to me. Because that's what they're all about here. And its applicability to law school is all over the place. Because you want to draw the inference as a lawyer that's least susceptible to attack. Or you know what I'm saying? You want to draw the most conservative inference humanly possible and build your case by being able to go back. Then when you're crossed, right? What, you're going to cross me on the likelihood there was a voice on the phone? But if I don't make that inference first, if I say it's Vicky's voice, you can attack that. That's much more attackable, right? Than saying, it's a dog calling. I mean, you know, like hello. So you would be able to attack it by saying there was nobody on the phone. You still have room to attack because again, once you do this, you get it? This cross-examination. Jim will find some way to take your perfectly reasonable, snug inference and stick it up your ass. But he'll do it with his, you know, oh my. You'll think he's being polite. You'll put, what's that object in my ass? Oh, but you get, it's really this dynamic process of saying, every time I make this jump, I'm at risk, right? So this is saying, which of the following, and they don't change that language, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? They can play with the words here and there, but all they're looking for is what's next, right? So if we can try an example, see if we have 172 here. That typically appears on your test about 3 times. That form of what I'm referring to as a conclusion issue would be about 3 or 4 times. Again, it's going to correlate with the number. So if it's number 23, there's a greater likelihood of it being very challenging.
In that same section, I'm pretty sure 9.
I'm sorry?
I said in that same section, I'm pretty sure 9 is one.
Okay, but I need the section and the question number.
Okay. Section 3 of test.
Yep.
Yeah. We were just,
And the question number?
9.
9. Okay, cool. Well, no, that says expresses the conclusion. Question number 9, section 3, which one of the following most accurately expresses the conclusion? Right, that's what we just did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this has to have which of the following is most strongly supported.
Question 20.
Question number 20? Yes, yes. Yes. Now, do you get, on the test, you would look at question number 20 and you'd say, I can hope. What I want you to get to think is not the issue necessarily that's difficult, it's the positioning, right? Now there are correlations, right? So for sure the correlation is more straightforward to identify a main conclusion issue than which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above. But you get the type of fine line distinctions they can require here where they want to produce failure. So you're saying, okay, so it influences your exam strategy because you're saying if I'm taking the test, right, and I'm looking at number 20, and it says which one of the following, if true, most strongly support which one of the following hypotheses. I don't even like the wording of it, but okay. So this is leading me to a conclusion. All right. And what do I have here? I have neuroscientists subjected volunteers with amusia. Now, does anybody know what that is? Neither do I. But you see they have the line there, so they're going to tell me what it is. So that's fine. The volunteers are people who have difficulty telling different melodies apart and remembering simple tunes. Okay, that's what these people have. So they have different, and I'd have to reread this and I'd be out of here. Just based on that, I'd be saying, you know what, I'll come back. But what do they have? The neuroscientists, the volunteers have difficulty telling different melodies apart and remembering simple tunes. So they compare them to shifts in pitch. I'm like, where does this come from? Comparable to those that occur when someone plays one piano key and then another. Okay, so we're subjecting volunteers with this condition, and what we're doing then is we're subjecting them to the shifts in pitch. So they have this condition, right? And now we're subjecting them to shifts in pitch comparable that occur that when someone plays one piano key and then another. The volunteers were unable to discern the difference between the tones. Okay, so the tones were a problem for these folks. And then the next sentence, but the volunteers were able to track time sequences of musical notes, so the timing they were okay on, and they were able to perceive slight changes in timing. So what I'm picking up here is that when it came to timing, the volunteers were fine. When it came to tone or pitch, they weren't fine. That's about all I can do. And I said I'm done. And again, here you're getting a sense for the test. If this isn't a level 5, I never had hair. You with me? But I mean, you're saying, it's going back to what you raised earlier, John. That's a 5. I mean, they're busting my horns. Right? So I'm not trying to get all special. I'm saying, okay, I've read it. The timing, that's that last sentence. You know, they're okay in timing. They're just not okay on pitch or tone. I'm done. And then I'm just going to pick one and get out of here. So try, see what you got up with. I'm sure it's a level 5. All right. It's fine not to, you can always pick F. When you're clueless, you're clueless. Just pick a letter and move on. Anybody like A? How about B? Oh, look at you B's go.
Hope that's right.
C? Okay, I'm saying D? Oh, little D's there. Somebody got company on, you know, E? No, okay. B's the answer. And what I'm trying to get is we'll look at the other two, right? But again, does everybody get, I'm quite certain, that this produced a failure rate in excess of 60%. Okay. So with that,
60%?
60.
60.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at that, and that's the assessment I would be making on the test. So I'm not going to get religion on this. I'm just going to give it my best shot and get out of here. But it does strike me that this was about, my attention clearly was brought to the fact that they were able to pick up timing. And it was equally brought to my attention that they were unable to pick up tone. And that had been related to pitch, to shifts in pitch. And I'm done. So B says the results, the Musier results, more from an inability to discern pitch than from an inability to discern timing. And that's, yes, because their timing was fine, so it must be that it results more from the inability to pick up pitch. Now, it would have been more straightforward to me if they had said tone than pitch, so I certainly would have kept reading, but the timing is absolutely essential because that's what they had no problem with. C, people who are unable to tell pitches apart in isolation are able to do so in the context of a melody by relying upon timing. There's way more information in C than we were given in the argument. And D, the ability to tell melodies apart depends on the discernment of pitch alone and not at all on the perception of timing. No, there's nothing in here that says pitch is all-consuming, you know, that it has to be all on, and that's a common thing they do, where they identify a characteristic that may be necessary, right? But then they say, not only is it necessary, it's exclusive. And there was nothing in here that would tell me that pitch alone was responsible.
So the dangerous word there would be not at all.
In which choice?
In D.
In
So
D.
you're saying that like not at all makes
Yeah.
it exclusive. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Or just pitch alone, just that
Yeah.
word alone.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
When I first read through it, I also wanted to go with D, but then I realized that I was less concerned ability to tell melodies apart and more concerned with the museum.
Yeah, that's right. Does everybody get the sense that question number 20 has not been placed there to advance your academic and law school career? You with me? But that's the psychometric thing. That's for me looking at that, flipping at the bird. Saying, no, it's me, right, so I'm going to do it, right? But if I were where you were in life, I'd be looking at it saying, you know what, that's why God gave me a third finger. I'm just not here. I mean, I'll do what I got to do, you know. But this is for, you know, the yokel who's heading for Yale, who I'm going to meet in court someday, you know. I'll deal with them then, but not now. I'm on their turf on the exam. They'll be on my turf later on. But all I want to do, that's it in terms of inferential conclusions. That's the only two things they do. They have identified the argument's main conclusion, or else. Identify that which is most strongly supported by the information above. That's it. Everything else is down here is deductive. And all that means is those conclusion questions require you to identify what must be true. So they're pretty straightforward about that. They'll say must be true. So any conclusion question, right, where it says, you know, based on the information above, which one of the five must be true. That's it. That means it must be true. You gave me all the information I need to get this done. They use, just like in assumption questions, they can change it and they can say which of the following is logically or properly inferred, or which of the following is logically or properly concluded. And that is which of the following must be true. If you're going to say the word logically or properly on this text, right, then you're saying it must be true. If something can be properly concluded, it means it cannot be challenged. If something can be logically concluded, it means it must be true. There may be additional things that also must be true, but it must be true. So on the must be trues, they have just these, they have three ways of doing it. One, must be true. Two, which of the following can be properly or logically concluded, or which of the following can be properly or logically inferred. That just means must be true. And the third one is they draw a line at the end of it. You'll see some of these where they'll say, basically, the argument can be properly completed by, and then they draw a line. So those three are deductive, right? And we'll touch them next week. Just remind me, right? Remind me, but we'll touch examples of those next week. And the difference between the must be true is it's wholly self-contained. So it's back to, okay, all cities have trees and Paris is a city, so what must be true? Paris is trees. So you just go with whatever they gave you. Now again, if they make that question number 21, there's a substantial likelihood you're going to be in pain. One of the principles of law is it's very, very common. Like if I'm writing, I'm going to include information you don't need, and I'm going to make as obscure as possible information that you do need. So if I'm in a case, right, I'm going to give you more information than you need, but the information I'm giving you is not helpful. But of course you don't know that because you're reading it, right? You haven't met with my client, but you get it. You haven't met with my client. So I'm giving you all this information, you're loving it. And you know, discovery is a wonderful thing. I go, yeah, you can discover my whole library. 99.6% of it's not relevant to this case. Hey, go read everything, help yourself. When they do this, must be true, right? Just be aware of this. And you're looking at it's question number 21 or question number 19. And it says, which of the following can be logically or properly concluded from the information above? Or even which of the following must be true. You can be reading 4 sentences where 2 or 3 of them are entirely irrelevant to solving what you're doing. So one of the techniques the writers are using on the LSAT is don't think every word you read is helpful. Don't think that every word you need is there to assist you in solving, because many words are there to send you down the wrong path. So the must be true thing, if it's question number 7, and at the end of it your mind has produced what must be true, you whack them all. Because how many things can conform to must be true? 1, right? It's really just how much work did the writer put into it, right, to make it difficult. And then there's that correlation. That's far more likely to be question number 22 than question number 2. Okay? Rise. Get something. We'll reconvene and take 15 minutes.